Good morning, everyone. This is Jim King with Friendship Sports, and we're going to continue with the book of Revelation study. And today we're going to be in chapter 12. So turn with me in your Bibles to chapter 12, if you would, and we'll just go right into it. This chapter is an overview of history from the beginning all the way until the end of the tribulation. And we're given these pictures of different people, and it's depicted as a woman and a child and a dragon. And so this chapter represents, or basically sums up, the entirety of history and what is going on in the spiritual realm. We happen to live in the very temporal realm, the physical realm here, and sometimes we don't realize what's going on behind the scenes with everything. And I think it's important for us in this chapter to recognize that there's been this great battle, this great war going on behind the scenes in a different dimension, the spiritual dimension. And it continues to this day. As a matter of fact, it's intensifying in this day because the time is drawing near for the return of Jesus, and the dragon, the demons and the demonic hosts of the dragon are at work right now, unlike any time in history, to try to defeat the children of God, the purposes of God, and also to get to his chosen people from the beginning, the Jews. And until the church is taken out of the way, he's not going to have success with that. But let's start in chapter 12, verse 1. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Now the 12 stars would be representing the children of Israel, the Jewish people. And out of that comes this woman. The woman comes out of the nation of Israel. We know her as Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus. Verse 2, then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. So we have this picture, and it's going to develop as we go through the chapter, but part of the picture is of this woman giving birth to a child. But way before that, even actually, Chuck Missler, if you get a chance to look at his Genesis chapter 5 study of the meanings of the names of the lineage in chapter 5 of Genesis, we're already talking about a picture of Jesus coming to save the world way back in Genesis chapter 5. So this has been going on since the beginning, but let's go to verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. So here is a picture of Satan, and we wondered where, the depiction of Satan with this pitchfork and horns and a red demonic being comes from. Really, this is one of the places right here. And I want to point out that in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, verse 17, verse 3, 7, and 9, talk about in greater detail this dragon, and also a depiction of what these things mean, the 7 heads and the 10 horns. It's going to be a depiction eventually during the tribulation period of a region, 7 regions of the earth. There's going to be 10 total leaders, 2 of which fall away, 1 which is like disqualified, and another that comes along that will eventually be the Antichrist. So we're talking about getting rid of the sovereignty of borders, going into regions of the earth and into a one world government. We'll get into that in later chapters. But this fiery red dragon has these different images with it, 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. Now, verse 4 and 5 talk about the mission of Satan. Okay, so we shouldn't really be that surprised when we're part of his attacks. But it says, his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to earth. Now, we read in Daniel, Matthew chapter 2, different places in Revelation a little bit more about this situation. But in the beginning, before man, there was angelic beings, and they had a place in heaven. Okay, they were created images of God. And Lucifer, who is Satan, was one of the highest angels in heaven, and he was before the throne. Beautiful, beautiful angel. And his fall was based on he wanted to be God. He didn't want or like that God was God. He wanted to be God. And he drew 1/3 of all the angels to follow after him. And when he was cast out of heaven to the earth, he took all those the third of the angels to the earth. And he was banished out of the heavenly realm to earth, especially his demonic forces, because in other places it says he's before the throne of God, and he is basically accusing the saints and accusing the brethren before God. And because of Jesus' blood and our acceptance of him, his accusations against us don't hold any power before the throne. But here we see in verse 4 that his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of the heavens. So this demonic being takes 1/3 of the angelic beings with him to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth. You can picture that image in your head where you have this Satan that is waiting for Jesus to be born. And it goes on to say, to devour her child as soon as it was born. So we recognize that during the early years of Jesus, there was a decree from Herod to kill all the male babies because he heard that a king of the Jews was born and would eventually become the leader of the Jewish people. And because Herod was a ruler, that was a threat to him, and immediately, because of this demonic force in him, okay, whether he was possessed or oppressed or whatever, he was given this idea by Satan to kill all the male babies in the area where Jesus was born. Okay, so those are demonic things that are happening. And I want to just explain just a little bit that these demons are given dominion or authority or power by Satan over certain aspects of the culture. For instance, you might have a demonic being that is extremely powerful. And I heard a wonderful message on this one time, and he had a specific name. Okay, and the name could be, something along the basis of introducing ideas to different people. That's his only job, is to introduce these ideas. And as they get established in the culture, there's other demons that are in charge of propagating those, the head demons' ideas. Okay, so in this situation, Herod was given these ideas, like, you should take care of all these threats. You should get rid of all these babies. In today's culture, we might see the same demon at play saying, it's a woman's right to have an abortion. It's okay to kill babies. Okay, and as that propagates in a culture, it becomes accepted. And the spirit of the age has always wanted death and destruction. And that includes human life of any kind. He hates the image of God because he wanted to be God, and God would not allow that. Okay, so what's going on behind the scenes is a very strong thing. When it got to Herod, there were already this demonic force, this being, was already at work. And he was trying behind the scenes. It wasn't just about Herod keeping his power. It was about killing the male child. It was about killing the Messiah. And he used this idea to kill all the male babies there, and that would include the child. Verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. So it moves real quickly through the life and ministry of Jesus. The dragon was not successful in killing this male child of the woman who was Jesus. And eventually this child was caught up to Jesus, not until after his death and burial, but after his resurrection, he was snatched away. There was a rapture of Jesus back to heaven. Okay, now what's interesting here is that it says that he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. We know that he did not do that during his ministry on the earth, but there will be a time that he will. And so later on in Revelation, we're going to study the return of Jesus to the earth, and he will rule the world with a rod of iron. Now, like, he will be the supreme ruler of the earth. It's not going to be like what we consider a supreme ruler, but there is no, he's not going to allow any upheaval during his reign on the earth until the very end, when he looses the devil one more time out of the bottomless pit to try to turn the nations against God one final time. Okay, but at this point, the male child is caught up to God. So he is in heaven at this point. In verse 6 it says, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, between the ascension of Jesus to heaven and the tribulation period, actually the middle of the tribulation period, there are a few thousand years, okay? And certainly we know historically that the enemy has been attacking Israel ever since. It doesn't go into a lot of detail here, but there will be a time at the middle point of the tribulation period when the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple at the middle point of the 7 years and basically says, I am God, and all people will worship me. We're going to get into that a little bit later. At that point, Israel, the Jewish nation, is going to realize we have been duped by this person. He is out for our destruction, and the Antichrist is going to call in his partners in battle from these other regions of the earth to make war with Israel. And Israel will flee Jerusalem, and hot on their heels is going to be this huge army that is wanting to annihilate the Jews. We already know that the Arab nations want the Jews completely annihilated. A lot of people don't realize that there's people in Russia, there's people in China, there's people all over the world that want the Jews eradicated, and we could say a lot of people in the United States want that too. Why? Because the spirit of the age hates the people of God that he created and set aside for a special purpose, meaning the Jews. Okay, now we as the church are offshoots of the Jewish people, and we're basically grafted in to the people of God as Gentiles that give our lives to Christ. Okay, so, but at that specific moment, the Jews will be fleeing. Here it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness. So in other words, the Jewish people are going to flee into the wilderness. And we know, and we're going to study later on, that the Jews will be successful as they're fleeing from this army to get to what's known as Petra. Petra is a literal place. You can go there and visit it right now, but it's this enclave in the rocks in this area not that far out of Jerusalem, and the Jews will be successful in getting there. And even though war will be made against them, they'll be protected supernaturally by God during that time in Petra. We'll get to that later. Verse 7, and this goes back now in history to the beginning. Verse 7, it says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer." So there's this spiritual war going on. There's this battle in the heavenly places. Michael, the archangels, against the dragon or the devil. So Michael and Lucifer were some of the highest angelic beings, and they battled. Okay, so there's this war going on in heaven, and there wasn't any place in heaven any longer found for the devil and his followers, the 1/3 of the angels. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So listen, it's very specific what Satan's mission is on the earth. It is to seek and kill and destroy human life, but especially those who follow after God or are called by God with a special calling. Okay, that's his mission. His mission is that, and he does a lot of that through the deceiving of the nations. So many of the nations of the earth right now, we could say that the United States is really being deceived more than any other time in our history, as we kind of limit the access of God or diminish or take away the power of God in our country. We see the deception and the increase of what Satan is wanting to do in our own nation. That would be true for any of the nations of the earth, by the way. And he deceives the whole world, and he was cast to earth, and his angels were cast with him. Now, we could go all the way back into the Genesis account of some of this, and that the Spirit of God hovered over the deeps of the water, and the earth was formless and void. Okay, that was the place that Satan and his followers were cast to before the creation of man and all those kind of things. So evil and this coup attempt by Lucifer in heaven was cast out, and that's what was on the earth before during this whole formless and void time on the earth. So before the grasses and the trees and the seas and the splitting of the day and the night, and so that's why when Adam and Eve were created and they were deceived by the snake or the serpent in the garden, he was already there. Okay, so kind of an interesting thing from the beginning. This play has been played out between these battles in the heavenly realm, and we're part of that. Okay, so verse 10, "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down." So there is this final time in heaven, okay, and the final time is not yet, okay, but when he was cast out of heaven, Satan, Lucifer, still had access to God here to accuse the brethren. But there is going to be a time where he is cast out completely. In other words, maybe this is a certain point in the first part of the tribulation period. My guess is it's right around the midpoint of the tribulation period, where Satan is no longer given access to God in heaven, and he's cast to the earth for the final time, and it is all out war upon the earth from that point forward, because he will realize my accusations have not worked, and now it's time to make war with all the people of the earth, but especially the Jew. Okay, all the people who have given their life to Jesus during the tribulation period will be facing death either before this time or after Satan is cast to the earth for the final time, because it's all out war. It's you have to worship him or you're put to death. Period. Okay. So he was cast out who accused them before God day and night, and has been cast down. Verse 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Okay. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So in this picture, it is telling us that Satan is cast down to the earth. It is the final time, and he is all out making war. And the saints, when I say saints, there's a dual saint here in this part of the tribulation period. There is the Jew who is known as saints. You go back in the Old Testament, and it's that terminology. And you have the Jews that are alive, and they are facing incredible wrath and an outpouring of the devil. We have the two witnesses in Jerusalem at that time speaking out against what is going on and prophesying against the people of the earth. They're also of the Jewish lineage. And so almost kind of the prophetic and the law part of it up to the, there's all this, these things in the play that are going on here, okay? But the reality is that people who accept Jesus during the tribulation are also known as saints. And these people are, it says, quite frankly, they were overcome by the blood of the Lamb. They would not give up their faith. They would unto death say, I will not worship the beast, and they will be put to death here. And the Jewish people will be persecuted unlike any other time in history. Okay, if it wasn't for the protection of God upon them, they would be wiped out. Okay, so the devil knows. Okay, his deception of the earth is the people of the earth don't know. The people of the earth, they think, oh, we're given power, we're given money, we're given, these places of authority, whatever, but it's demonic beings that are infiltrating their heart and their mind, and the devil knows that his time is short, so he is going to go all out. To be honest with you, that's kind of what I feel like going on with the virus. Now, God may tarry, he may last way beyond my lifetime, because of his great love and compassion, but it could happen today. Things are set in place. You can see the hearts and minds of leaders all over the world that are just clamoring for power without any recognition of human life or love for other people. It's simply, this is my time, I'm going for it. And it doesn't matter who lives or dies in that period of time. Okay, so the setting is set right now for the taking away of the church. And if that happens, this void is going to be quickly filled with all these people trying to get even more power and money and authority. But what's going to happen is this Antichrist, filled with the devil, is going to take over rulership of the earth. And these are the final years, and Satan is going to just go ballistic, especially from the midpoint of the tribulation on. So verse 13, and we'll finish up chapter 12 here. Verse 13, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. That is specifically the Jews. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time. So that's 3.5 years. Okay, the entire purpose of the dragon at the midpoint of the tribulation is to bring persecution to the woman. This is the Jewish people. Okay, now as a side note to that, there will be people on the earth that are not Jewish in lineage, but were grafted into the people of God because of their faith in Christ during that 7 years. It could be that people who were believers before the rapture of the church, but they just weren't serious in their faith, they weren't living for God. And all of a sudden, boom, the church and the people who are ready for God are taken. And some of the people left behind are like, oh man, I blew it. I wasn't ready. I didn't live my life for God. And they commit their life to Christ for however long. They will also be persecuted unto death during this time. So if they don't survive the pouring out of God's wrath on the earth by all these judgments, they're also going to have the devil himself that is actively pursuing and hunting them down. So some of us read or saw the Hunger Games, and this game of basically humans killing each other, and it's part of this game to see who wins. Hey, Hunger Games is like play time when it comes to that time during the tribulation. You will be hunted down, okay? If you're a Jew or a Christian, you will be hunted down unto death. Now, she goes into the wilderness. The Jews go into the wilderness. I already said about Petra. They're going to run, they're going to flee into this place called Petra, and they're being nourished for 3.5 years. So supernaturally, God is going to take care of his people in Petra for this second half of the tribulation period. Okay, so they're going to flee their homeland, they're going to flee Jerusalem, and they're going to go to this place. In verse 14, it says she's given 2 wings and nourished for a time, times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent being the devil, they're protected from the serpent. Verse 15, so the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. These are warriors. These are, maybe they're foot soldiers, they're tanks, there's whatever, but they're going after the Jew. And John says that it looks like water being spewed out to try to get to the woman as she's fleeing. Verse 16, but the earth helped the woman. So God intervenes here, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So there was probably some kind of earthquake and a splitting of the earth, literally, and whoever was chasing after the nation of Israel as they were fleeing into the desert towards Petra, they get swallowed up by this great chasm of some kind. And it says, and the dragon was enraged with the woman in verse 17, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So basically what is happening here is the death sentence of people who put their faith in Jesus during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And because the devil cannot get to the woman, the Jew, as they flee into Petra, he changes directions and says, okay, now I'm angry, I am enraged that I can't get to who I want to get to. Now I'm going to go make war with the rest of her offspring. So Jews that live in other places of the world and did not concentrate in Israel and Jerusalem area and were part of this fleeing to Petra, and there's Jews all over the earth. And then you have Christians, you will have people who follow Jesus and are Christians all over the earth too, that are basically in hiding. They're trying to survive at that point too, but now they will be hunted down because of the beast being enraged. So there's just a couple things I want to take away from this before we end up. And it seems to me in chapter 12, verse 11, there's a few things that we can come to a conclusion on. Okay, first, I believe there's 3 things that we can take away here, and it's in relation to overcoming our enemy. Okay, let's read verse 11 again. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, So the first thing is that how we overcome the enemy is by the blood of the Lamb. At the cross, when Jesus was crucified, his blood was shed. And it's told to us that by the shedding of his blood, upon us receiving that he was the Messiah, the shedding of the blood is for the remission of our sin. So on that ground, we can claim, you know what? Satan, you can come after me. The demonic forces can come after me, but you cannot overcome me because I am of Jesus. I am his child, and I'm going to claim victory in this because of what happened at the cross. So that's the first way that we can overcome. If you're in temptation, if you're being persecuted or whatever, I want you to use these three things. But the first one is, hey, the blood of the cross, it covers me. I am saved. Eternally I'm secure in God. Second, it goes on to say, and by the word of their testimony. So when we go through life and as we face the things we face, and I personally believe that we are at a time where it will be unprecedented how we are gone after. Like this could easily become a police state in the United States, and they could come right up to our door or our home and force us to try to do things, or maybe vaccinations, or sign a registry, or get in a chip implanted. We are at the precipice here. Okay, and how do we overcome some of these things? The second thing says, it was through the word of their testimony. So in other words, even unto death, they were willing to say, hey, I am God's. It doesn't matter what you do, what you force me to do. It doesn't matter if you do things that are completely opposite of what I believe in. I will not change my testimony. I will follow. And my testimony is that I have made Jesus Christ the Lord of my life. Okay, end of conversation. I personally submit to the God of heaven before I do a president or a governor or a nation. That's my conviction. And it may send me to my grave someday. And if that's the case, then so be it. Okay, but God is my King. Jesus is my Lord, and I'm not going to bow down to any of the governments of the earth or people in power who try to force me to do otherwise. And so here's these people that are overcome by the devil and his forces during the tribulation period. And it says they really weren't willing to give up these things, and they overcame the enemy, even unto death. They overcame. The first way, the blood of the cross. The second way, their testimony. And then the third way, it says, and they did not love their lives to the death. Now, the reason that we can claim that and stand on that is that, hey, the life that we live is not even our own. It is of Jesus. We want to be followers of Jesus and go after him completely. And my life is consumed with what Jesus wants for me. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't fail or I don't sin or I don't struggle with certain things, but ultimately, when it comes right down to it, I want to fulfill the purpose that God has for my life on this earth. So the opposite of that would be demonic forces introducing these ideas to the leaders of the earth, and the leaders of the earth begin to believe through deception that we should be giving them our power, and they would become our authority. We would bow down to them. Okay, so there is this struggle in the spiritual realm, but there's also the struggle in the physical realm as Satan is trying to put the people of the earth either under his deception or put them to death because they will not follow him. So those three things are ways that we can overcome our enemy. And I hope that helps you this week. Why don't you contemplate that a little bit as you are thinking through this Revelation study. And next time we'll get into chapter 13. So you may want to read ahead, read chapter 13, ask God to give you insight into that chapter before we get together, and then I'll go through it. So I hope you have a great day. Thank you.